that could go wrong when you're over there. Most of the time, I try not to think about it, but it's something that could happen. Nuclear war. That's the elephant in the room, and I get that, and people are scared. But now's not the time to be scared. Now's the time to man up, and for the people in the U.S., write your congressman. Write your congressman. It only takes 50 signatures or 50 calls per state about one issue. And it doesn't matter who you talk to, Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter. You have to do something. You got to help. Probably it's late tonight. Tomorrow, I'm thinking about calling, but I'm going to call all of them and do something. Donate to Ukraine. Just give those planes, whatever weapons. Continue to do that. Uh, you know, uh, do it all, because it's either now or it's never. That's what it feels like. And I mean, just if nobody knows, the Taiwan it's responsible for 60% of the world's output of microprocessors. Now think about that. 60% of the world's microprocessors. Imagine if China destroyed it or owned it. Even worse, if they owned it. It's just, think about all the defense equipment that use those chips that we need so badly. And this I know I'm going down the rabbit hole here, but it could get bad. So just think about that. I'm not trying to scare people, but just think about it. And all you have to do, look up, Google, who is my congressman, or who is my state representative, whatever. And all you got to do is call them, and it takes 5 minutes. I've done it before. It's not that bad. So yeah, appreciate it, guys.
If I could, I want to chime in about Taiwan, just to kind of give you an example.
Sorry to interrupt. I have to leave, but I just want to tell the panel real quick. There's a Tomcat Intel named Rick Hauser who's trying to get in. He wanted to speak to something with Patrick. If you could let Rick Hauser, his handle is Chicago Iba or something like that. If you could. Sorry to interrupt you, sir. My apologies. Go on.
No problem. And I'm going to be real brief. Taiwan goes, my business goes. I sell a product I brought to this country.
Is it my turn? I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, I was hoping to sort of bring the conversation back to no-fly zones, specifically Greg Bagwell's proposal. We had him on earlier in the space last week. But actually, before I do that, I was just hoping to tell Ferlane specifically, and I guess all Ukrainians in general, that adding to what some of the other speakers have said, that the sort of calm composure you have in the face of all the horror and pain is actually, some of the most inspiring things I've ever seen. And yeah, I just want to say Slava Svobodny Ukraini every time I see you, relate that and hold to your humanity. So thank you. But yeah, so we had this discussion early in the week that we could potentially have a very strict UN no-fly zone, and the speaker actually managed to convince both M and Yehuda of the viability of it. So I was hoping if some of our other regular military panelists could probably comment on it. I think Patrick would probably be the best, have the most experience to actually talk about it.
Well, I'm not familiar with Mr. Bagwell's.
Sorry, I put the link up in the nest. It's the 9th card in now, I think.
Oh, very good. Let me give that a read before I respond to him.
He was specifically proposing a no-fly zone all the way up to the Russian border, and that it using F-35 specifically would make it workable, and the fact that it would be a NATO-run thing would put Putin in a position where he was unable to escalate, really. So yeah, I was hoping we could sort of discuss that with a wider audience again.
Chris, do you want to speak to something on that?
I'll just say quickly, I think what our speaker meant to say is that it would be a UN authorized mission, not a NATO mission. That was explicitly what former Air Marshal Bagwell was saying. It would include air assets from any nation around the world as the UN Charter envisaged, who wanted to participate in a mission that was authorized either under, I mean, there are various proposals for UN authority, but the most credible ones so far are under Article 42 of Chapter 7, or which relates to, which would require a vote in the Security Council where Russia's veto would be disregarded, and there's a rationale for that, or in the General Assembly along the lines of the previous resolution, or it could be under, some have posited, under Article 51, which is the right to self-defense and collective self-defense, which Ukraine is exercising at the moment, but which in principle they have the right to exercise with others, with in effect a coalition of the willing, and the UN would that would need to be reported to the UN, and the UN would have to recognize that that was taking place. But under any of these scenarios, the actions taken, enforcement actions in the air or elsewhere, it could be an enforcement action on the Black Sea, for example, down the road. Blockades and embargoes are also envisaged in the UN Charter. These would have the force of international law under the UN Charter and involve nations that were willing to participate. Obviously, some, probably most, I think Bagwell suggested, would be also NATO allies, but it would not be a NATO mission. It would not be commanded and controlled by NATO. There would have to be some separate ad hoc command and control arrangement set up. But that was his proposal, and he's laid it out both in that paper that he did for the universities associated with in London, and there's another version of it. I mean, there's what various people have been discussing, and then there's what Bagwell was discussing. So I'm not sure which you want to go into. Bagwell was talking about UN authorization. I don't think he got into the diplomatic. I don't think he gets into the diplomatic mechanics of which article it could be done under. I have heard from a number of diplomats serving at the UN, those who were formerly there, lawyers and so forth. Many of them are preparing op-eds and their own internal proposals about a variety of scenarios. But the two most likely ones are the most likely provisions of the Charter for use in this context that I've heard of are Article 42, which is under Chapter 7, the authorization of use of can't remember the phrase, but assets essentially on air, land, or sea to enforce objectives set by the Council under international peace and security. Now, there is that under the Charter has to be voted on the Security Council. Russia would veto. There are other articles, and here I'm not confident of the number, that I think it's under the peaceful resolution of disputes, that stipulate in the Charter that a country that is a party to the dispute must not take part in the vote. That provision is not directly associated with Article 42, but I think we haven't been in a situation exactly like this in the past. I think there would be a movement to somehow lower the status of or disregard entirely Russia's veto in the Security Council if it went to the Security Council. The other opportunity under Article 52 is to, given the gridlock or the prospect of a Russian veto in the Security Council, is to take it to the General Assembly and get a 2/3 majority vote, which is what we had earlier on the simpler resolution, which deplored Russia's invasion and called for the withdrawal of troops. The other provision, which is simpler, is simply under Article 51 of the Charter, which is also in Chapter 7, which provides for states to engage in self-defense or collective self-defense. Keep in mind that that provision was used to authorize, under international law, all U.S. actions in Afghanistan after 9/11, as well as those of their allies. And there were additional mandates, obviously, from the UN for ISAF, for the use of force in various contexts, as well as all the terrorism resolutions. But the right of self-defense is a very real provision of the UN Charter, a very real power under international law. And it's not just the country that's being attacked. There is a right to collective self-defense.
Go ahead, Austin.
Okay, yeah. So specifically, the reason I asked a question regarding overriding a Security Council veto was I was curious if there's something specific in the charter or a process that hadn't been sort of described. But I think what you're talking about is essentially General Assembly Resolution 377A, Uniting for Peace, which was the resolution passed to allow for the continuation of a UN-led coalition in Korea, and basically preemptively nullifying Soviet vetoes for that. That initial deployment was authorized by the Security Council because the Chinese seat was occupied by the government in Taipei. And at the time, the Soviet Union was boycotting the United Nations because they were protesting that the Chinese government in Beijing didn't have the Chinese Security Council seat. So in regards to that General Assembly overriding a veto, that would be Resolution 377, which, okay. So regarding a UN, I'm going to divide my comments here into two parts. First off, my opposition towards a no-fly zone is predicated upon the fact that I think escalating the war beyond the current borders that it is in right now, or the potential for that escalation, carries far more risks than a no-fly zone would inherently benefit. Specifically, if a no-fly zone is being advocated for the preservation of civilian life, we have seen far more civilian casualties being caused by Russian indirect fire assets and ground-based guided missiles than we have had seen from airstrikes. And as of right now, Ukrainian integrated air defense systems are active, as is the Ukrainian Air Force. So I think a far better way with less risks for escalation to other nations would be to transfer aircraft to the Ukrainian Air Force, allow them to more properly defend themselves, as well as transferring more integrated air defense assets to the Ukrainian ground forces in order to allow them to shoot down more Russian aircraft. Now, specifically in regards to the UN acting as a body to enforce this, where I find my own skepticism in is the fact that the Resolution 377A has only been instituted once, and that was in the case of Korea. It is a fundamentally outside of the Cold War, untested resolution, specifically in regards to Security Council vetoes, and I think there's been a very clear reason why we haven't seen a veto overridden since then. I think there have been multiple conflicts where there's a political will to override a veto from some member states, but when those go to sort of general polling within the General Assembly, you see a lot of countries who may have supported like a verbal affirmation of it pull out because they understand the consequences of expanding that conflict. And also what I will say is, in recent memory, the UN has had a very sordid past in regards to organizing interventions into active conflict zones. There were many issues we saw with the intervention in former Yugoslavia. There were many issues we saw with the UN monitoring mission in Rwanda. And there's a very clear reason that NATO kind of took the lead in regards to ISAF and the war in Afghanistan. And it's the fact that, generally speaking, when UN forces enter a conflict zone, they get shot at. And the structure of the United Nations, specifically in regards to how, I'm assuming this no-fly zone would be considered a peacekeeping mission, how that chain of command breaks down is a very inflexible and very bureaucratic system. And so I think even with the technological advantages being described with this plan, with F-35s and things like that, the UN leading the charge, then the UN coordinating that would be a logistical disaster in the making. But my last point I'll make is that, even if you have, and what I would assume this would be predominantly Western air forces and Western aircraft enforcing it. So, okay. So first point, I don't think it passes through the UN. I don't see a reasonable way for it to. What I'll say beyond that is, even if it's the UN sort of taking the lead here and not NATO, we're still looking at, Western aircraft, and in the case of F-35s, F-22s, things like that, American aircraft shooting down Russian aircraft. And I think irregardless of the international organization providing sort of the moral or diplomatic impetus behind that, that still is a clear pathway to escalation beyond, far beyond, with ramifications far beyond what we're seeing right now. I hope that summed it up.
Guys, may I jump in? Firstly, I would like to just say thank you for everyone and for Imperious Guardsmen, especially since you addressed me in your previous speech. I was listening the whole time. I wasn't active as a speaker. Now I'm a co-host, so I guess I got promoted. Yeah, I'm not leaving you. So basically, I'm just so you are having situational awareness. I'm with you during the night, then I have a couple of hours of napping after the end of the session, and then I'm just functioning the whole day here on the ground for working with NGUs, AFUs, and state border guards, and getting everything needed sorted out on the ground. What I wanted to say, I completely agree as to the no-fly zones, even though at some point we saw them as some kind of like a survival blanket or survival shield or something like this. I've done my share of research and spoke with so many specialists. Like, if it was like just a UN initiated no-fly corridor. Yes.
I can't hear anybody in here. I just wanted to say, these chemicals.
Hello? What was that?
Somebody was just interrupting. Go ahead.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So if it happens that they invoke UN-led just evacuation corridor from the west part of Ukraine, where Russians haven't had the chance to get anything, it would be probably just beneficial for kids to feel safe to travel, because some of the kids and some of the families I've been speaking with, they would like to evacuate from their basement cellars. They call them dungeons, actually. But they are terrified of the way. So it takes 3-4 days to travel from the eastern parts to the western parts. And you've mentioned the sizes of Ukraine. Once again, I'm going to repeat you that Ukraine is pretty much as Texas, and the biggest country in Europe. Kyiv is bigger than New York. Kharkiv is bigger than Paris. And what Barcelona, I think, combined. Kharkiv is our second biggest city. But as of now, after doing my share of analytics, I feel more. I feel that there's going to be more harm in no-fly zone. Just getting more air defense assets and more planes would be beneficial. And I also would like to emphasize that you've seen how capable our army and our special forces and our guards and state border guards, national guards are, but you have to mind that the majority of those guys, they've been in the army for like less than 8 years. Some of them have been there for like 6 years. They are also figuring out how to cope with this on the fly, utilizing everything they have, like learning by doing it at some point, remembering what they've learned, as you've mentioned, with the help of the Canadian armed forces of the USA, Britain, Lithuania, and all of the allies. They were able to gain the knowledge, but they only had the chance to practice it maybe a couple of times during the combined exercises. So, yeah, they're doing what they can. I just spoke with a lieutenant from the NGU. It's the Rapid Reaction Brigade. The connection is really bad, so I'm able to get in touch with her only once per day, maybe. Staying strong, holding the positions, going to the east. Everything is good there. Everything is good in the JFO. The enemy is approaching. I think they have like 30, 40 kilometers intelligence that they are coming, but are still standing as well. Vasylkiv, Fastiv, western direction from Kiev. The positions are holding on. Nothing has changed. And I wanted to address one thing, like obviously. I am, and a lot of Ukrainians are composed because like we are tough people, tough as hell. Sometimes when I stumble upon tweets where it's like after seeing Ukrainians in action, I fucking wonder who the fuck wants to mess around with them. Yeah, this is what's happening. But we are still human beings, and everyone has their own way to cope with this stress. Like for me, for instance, when I'm speaking with you, just so you have an idea, I'm laying on the bed and just hugging the German Shepherd, just basically petting her to death. It calms her down, it calms me down, and I feel like safe, and I feel like there's still something to hold on to and still keep sane. Some people are singing in the basement. Some people are playing musical instruments in the basement. You've probably seen our orchestra playing, like not an orchestra, basically that's more like improvised or military orchestra playing in front of the Odessa Opera House. Because yes, same goes to our guys in the completely demolished unit in Vasylkiv, the orchestra whom I seen playing even YMCA during the. I'm not joking, guys. They played YMCA during the football match with the Canadian Forces. We had the charity match in this summer. I would say Canadians are really good at hockey, but like soccer isn't their like forte. But still, they played YMCA, and then now we're playing national anthem of Ukraine in front of the nearly collapsed buildings. So some people are just think about it. Some people's stress relief method is making camo nets. Some people are knitting, grannies and women in the basement knitting for kids who right now have lost their homes and have lost their clothes, and they need to get something warm or like blankets or something. Men, as of right now, their way of stress relief is getting to know more about, and women as well, by the way, because we have a lot of mechanics. They are trying to learn more about new devices and how to tweak them in a way so they can be like helpful and useful. So I can reassure you, it's going to be a long way to deal with this, but at the same time. We will persevere. So thank you, guys. Who wants to speak right now?
Thank you.
I've got it for him. Thanks very much for that. I think, Patrick, did you want to respond to Air Marshal Bagwell's opposition?
I see that Aaron is holding his hand for a while. Aaron, would you mind speaking right now?
Sure. Sorry, I just getting some weird text messages, and I'm not sure whether it's Russian hackers or something, but I don't know who it is. Anyway, have you guys heard about the possibility of having, in a sense, a Western area no-fly zone around Lviv to get refugees out? Now, it's still it's a risk. Yes, it's a risk still. But what are your thoughts on this? I was wondering, because the Pentagon has discussed it, whether it's going to come into effect. It's a risky action, but yet it's not a no-fly zone, which is again, it's more, which would be a lot more risky, right? Of course, that would be far riskier. But in this sense, it is meant to just get refugees out. I wanted to ask.
I mean, Russia went in the Ukraine. Why, and they were uninvited. Why can't we come into a place we're invited?
That's true. I agree. And that would be absolute. I think under the under UN conditions, I think Russia would accept that. I mean, I'm hoping they would. I want to hear what your thoughts are. I mean, on this, and it is concerning because on multiple levels. Anyway, just wanted to hear what everybody had to say.
Okay, I see that Brian is holding his hand for a while. Let's do Brian, then John, and then Patrick. Brian? Brian Porras, are you here? Okay, he's probably...
No, let's move on.
Yeah. John?
Frederick has his stuff. Frederick?
Hey, couple of follow-up comments and a question. One question I had back to the discussion about no-fly zones. I mean, is there any sense that if we the hypothetical with all the caveats laid out resulted in forcing Russia to abstain from a vote, that China wouldn't, as a proxy, veto on their behalf as a matter of talking about U.S. assets in direct conflict with Russia. That's a completely different beast than supplying munitions or other support, intelligence, etc. If we have the ability to support without giving Russia the excuse to say, "See, we were right all along," they are coming for us, and this is all a NATO ploy to come after Russia, or whatever they would claim. I think everyone really wants to be involved and help in the capacity we can, but are very conscious, much as the Ukrainians were initially prior to the invasion, to not take the bait to give Russia excuses or the ability to confuse or point the finger in the other direction. And it's a hard task to be disciplined, and there are factors beyond what you want to do that come into play there. The question that I had was a lot of the stalled or abandoned equipment in the convoys. There's a lot of personnel that drove in with those. Do we have a sense or an accounting of how many POWs or surrenders? Do we have a feel for what percentage of combatants are accounted for from those convoys, as opposed to still at large in the woods, or donning Ukrainian civilian clothes and lying in waiting?
I get what you mean. We don't have the exact number, and I've actually tried to look for it on the website, which they are right now sharing with the mothers of Russian soldiers. And I've seen the report from the CNN where they spoke with the woman who is on the hotline. No one can tell the exact number. I'm pretty sure they won't even be disclosing this information up to the end of the war. So just to have an idea, we know that there's a lot of them detained. We know there are a lot of them in the woods, and they know that the Ukrainians are finding the most creative way to detect the spies within us, or sabotage groups, using mostly our Ukrainian language. Some of the words and phonetic structures that they can't actually physically pronounce, because their tongues control the way they want to, or they don't have these vowels or consonants, so they're on the way. Patrick, you were going to say something. Would you like to continue?
Yes, Verlaine, thank you. I had a chance to read Air Marshal Bagwell's report in the UK Independent, and it's basically the same thing he wrote in that think tank he's associated with. So if I've got this right, he's basically saying that we can do this under the UN, and we can establish these air exclusion corridors, and we can essentially establish a quasi no-fly zone with and he credit to him, he acknowledges this. He says, and we will shoot down Russian aircraft if we have to. Okay, well, at least he's honest about that. Most people who advance this don't necessarily go to that logical conclusion of we'll have to shoot down Russian aircraft, so credit to him on that. And he says that we can suspend Article 5 during the course of this to prevent a wider conflict being precipitated. Here's my problem. Going through 87,000 different UN and international laws is self-justification. The Russians won't care. The Russians didn't care about international law when they invaded Ukraine. A piece of paper is not going to faze Vlad in the slightest. The only people that matters to are Western diplomats. No offense, Chris. The other problem here is, as soon as you do this, as soon as you start shooting down Russian aircraft in Ukrainian airspace, after revoking Article 5, the air bases those aircraft launched from became legitimate targets. Do you think Poland or Romania is going to host anybody's aircraft if their air bases are going to come under Russian missile attack? No. That is never going to happen in a million years. No one's thinking about the second and third order consequences of this, and it really disturbs me, especially from someone of Air Marshal Bagwell's pedigree and reputation. So what you're going to have is Russian SAMs and aircraft splashing NATO aircraft, probably NATO aircraft, or at least Western aircraft, under UN command, which is the other side of this. The UN has never been competent to command anything in its life on this scale. The last time it did this, I think it might have been Austin who brought this up, was in Korea. And the Russians had no problem sortieing their own aircraft with their own planes under North Korean colors to kill UN troops. They're not going to have a problem with it this time, because we're sticking our nose back into what they consider to be their sphere of authority. So what you will do is precipitate a widening of the war, and you will do so under the auspices of an organization least competent to manage it, that being the UN. So what you may see is Russian gas attacks on Polish air bases that are hosting aircraft, because, hey, they're legitimate targets. If you step into this, you become a legitimate target. The Poles are going to be the first ones to understand this. The Romanians will too. They will never allow this to be based from their territory if you suspend Article 5. They are not going to take that chance. Never in a million years. Furthermore, if you start forcing the Russians to take heavy losses in their aircraft, they are going to escalate. I guarantee you they're going to escalate. They're not going to care under what international law you did this under. It's not going to matter to them. They're going to see this as NATO attacking Russia, because it will be NATO attacking Russia no matter how you frame it. And unless you're willing to risk the potential for catastrophic escalation, You can't do it. And if you are willing to risk the potential for catastrophic escalation, I frankly question everyone's sanity. There are ways to do this, and it is not directly. This is a lesson that was well learned and appears to have been forgotten. And furthermore, this notion that you can set up some type of humanitarian corridor or whatever, it's not going to matter unless you are willing to shoot down Russian aircraft operating in that exclusion zone. That's what it keeps coming down to every time, no matter how you frame it, no matter how you couch it, no matter what parameters you put on it, you will be killing Russian military personnel. And if you think they're going to take that lying down, you have another thing coming. This is still a bad idea.
Okay. Does anyone have a comment on that? Okay. Yeah, I see.
If I can chime in, one of the things that, for instance, former ambassador to Russia, McFall, has suggested, and he's not the only person. I think this is a decent thing, and it touches on what some of the other speakers have said in the past, is that we could also just be providing counter battery radar, which would allow us to strike back at these indirect fires from artillery and rockets. And again, right now, although there's a lot more terror involved in the air campaign, a lot of actual damage is being done by these indirect fire units. And I think that would potentially have more direct impact upon lessening human loss of life.
Thanks for bringing that up, Peter. I saw that as well. I think it's actually one of the better ideas that I've seen from Ambassador McFall. So I'd be curious to get the perspective of Patrick and some of the other military guys and whether that counter battery radar would be helpful for the Ukrainians. Go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, go Patrick.
Well, Peter, break that down for me because I'm not familiar with this. Are they suggesting that they use Western radar to assist Ukrainian counter battery, or that Western radar and counter battery?
No, just providing, like, there's a whole range of counter battery radars that have been produced over the years. This one was actually a counter battery radar system that's been produced since the 1980s. Obviously, again, matching the trajectories of projectiles, the trajectories of projectiles is pretty much the same kind of art, whether it's 1980s or 2000s. We don't have any stealth artillery shells, right? So he was suggesting taking a lot of these, which we have in inventory in great measure, and just giving them over to the Ukrainians and letting them use them.
Well, we'd have to teach them how to operate them first.
Exactly.
Again, I'm fine with giving the Ukrainians the ability to defend themselves. The problem is with Western equipment, there's going to be a lag time they may not be able to afford.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't have time. I see that Condor is holding his hand. Condor, do you want to say something?
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to kind of point out that, I feel like on our side of the fence, we look at Russia and we're like, oh, what are they not going to like? Are they going to like this? Are they going to like? I mean, they've already declared war. Do you think the people on the other side of the fence that are already in Russia, do you think that they're thinking, oh no, what is the U.S. not going to like? I don't think so. I don't think Putin's saying that. What is the U.S. not going to like? I don't think so. So, it's kind of one of those things where I feel like it's a one-sided deal where we're the ones saying, oh man, what is Putin not going to like today? I'm not taking hits at anybody, but it just kind of feels like that. And if if you're on the side, well, maybe we shouldn't give these planes to Ukraine, or maybe it's going to be overstepping our bounds, then yeah, just go ahead, man.
Yeah, it all comes to what if. I got what you mean. Let's do Wolverine 84 and then Austin.
So the thing I was going to say goes with back to the counter battery. They have counter battery. Some of it is U.S. and they already know how to use those ones. So supplementing them with more of those specific systems would be a great idea, because there is going to be no lag time. As long as the U.S. approves it, then that's fine. The second is the U.S. system that they have is not the only system that they do have. And this we can fall back to in the same kind of like the same thing that going along with what similar to what the Polish are doing with the MiG-29s. Ukrainians have a bunch of Russian-built, Soviet-built, whatever, systems that they currently have in the inventory. Now, if I go back and look, I can actually probably check and find out that some of those systems are actually built in Kharkiv. So if those systems are actually built in Kharkiv, that means they would still have the capacity to build them. They would also have the capacity to repair theirs, and any systems that the Russians were to lose in combat, like especially that they're losing, they would also be able to take those and made them up to their systems and use them with theirs. The other thing is this, like, the former Warsaw Pact countries, they have a bunch of these systems too, that there would not be a lag time if they could do some type of transfer like what they're doing right now. So, obviously there's a lot of big ifs, but if you tried, like Patrick was saying, if you try to introduce any new type of counter battery radars to the Ukrainians, it's going to be a case of too little, too late, because it's going to take them a couple months to learn that system and to become good with it, instead of backfilling them with more of what they already have. And especially if this budget goes through, the 13.8 billion goes through the Ukrainians, well then I, send them more Humvee ones, because we probably have a ton of them, especially with the military going to the JLTVs. Some of those vehicles are actually going to be getting, gotten rid of anyways. So use that part of the package, is send them more of the counter battery radars that the United States already has.
Yeah,
That would
exactly.
have been cool.
On point, Humvees are highly requested and they're highly needed. Actually, there is a shortage of,
Right.
transportation vehicles for basic transportation in Ukrainian army.
And just to add something, as I mentioned, I know, guys, that you want to get us the best and the most modern, but our guys don't mind having anything. If it's something that you find like last generation, or the generation that you have almost like forgotten about, is still in the storages and it's still functional, consider getting it here. They will, if they have something similar, they can figure it out with the assistant on the fly. It would be really beneficial.
They're still using, even donations are being used to purchase pickup vehicles or civilian pickup vehicles to put them into use in combat battalions. So there is a shortage of basic transportation vehicles.
I saw, okay, Austin and Wolverine, I think. Wolverine, would you like to add something? Wolverine?
Yes.
Or
Sorry.
just, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies. I was looking up some. So one of the listeners actually just sent me also. So the Ukrainians are actually gotten a new counter battery radar that I was not even aware of. And these counter battery radar systems are actually already being built in Ukraine. So these are a completely new system, and the Ukrainian has a limited amount. But the good side about it, though, is that this is showing that the Ukrainians have the capacity and the capability to introduce their own new counter battery radar systems into the fight. So even if they can get funding from the United States for that, to get more materials, and that would actually be the best, considering everything that's going on. And if they're already building them, they get that more money that can speed up being built, because as long as they hold Kharkiv, or wherever the places that these vehicles may be built at, because I know there's I think Patrick had told me there's like, or not Patrick, Walter had told me there's like 3 to 4 different places that they can be built. But if they have these capabilities, and they can produce them, then that would actually help the Ukrainians out in the long run. And just an FYI, this information I pulled up is actually public information, and it is all over the internet, so it's not like classified or anything like that. And I didn't actually, like I said, I didn't go to the numbers. It's just that they are building these new systems.
Yeah, on the side note, we can also mention that Ukrainian government and military officials are trying to transfer, just procure and transfer M142 high mobility artillery rocket systems to Ukraine. It's like significantly requested or highly requested right now.
What system was that?
M142 HIMARS or HIMARS.
HIMARS.
Yeah.
HIMARS.
Yep. They're trying to get that like officially right now and addressing American government.
I mean, it's. I'm not going to go into the system itself. There are issues with aspects of the system. I will say that kind of make it. How can I say this? Oh, it's hard to say how I can say it without like putting it over on blast and everything like that. But
if it's OPSEC, just leave it. It's fine. You don't have to go into it.
It's not really so much as OPSEC, is that I don't want to sit here and say something. And then like if we got KGB or former KGB or FSB or GRU guys, they're going to come up and say, oh, now we know what to do with these systems. So it's not that it's classified. It's just knowledge from working on these systems, around these systems when I was overseas. So I will leave it at that.
That's all good. So Austin, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had 2 points, and Wolverine kind of covered one of them already, so I'll keep that one super brief. And I think, we've had a lot of conversations previously about former Soviet stockpiles, specifically in regards to aircraft that would be easy to integrate within the armed forces of Ukraine. And I see very little reason why that standard doesn't also apply to long-range indirect fire or counter battery sort of radars there. And when you look at the militaries of, Poland, the Czech Republic, Romania, there are these, post-Soviet stockpiles that could very quickly be moved to the armed forces of Ukraine and adopted by them to enhance their current capabilities there. So in that, we're in total agreement. And then briefly on sort of Condor's point on, it sort of appears like the West is worried about angering Putin. And sort of like, what does Putin think about this thing that we're doing right now? I think specifically as it pertains to something like a no-fly zone or sort of direct engagement between Western forces with seeing sort of the same civilian casualties that we're currently seeing in Mariupol, in Riga, in Tallinn, in Bucharest, and in many other, border cities currently consolidated within the Western Alliance. So I don't think the calculus is necessarily how does Putin feel about this. It is preservation on behalf of not wanting to escalate this conflict beyond how terrible it already is. And that's why I think, specifically as it pertains to all these proposals about a no-fly zone, the impetus should remain upon not having direct engagement between NATO member states' military personnel and military personnel of the Russian Federation. It should be to continue to arm and train the Ukrainian armed forces to the teeth and allow them to defend themselves in the best way possible.
Hey, yeah, I wasn't saying don't. Just for the record, I wasn't saying don't. Do a no-fly zone. What I was saying is that I think just on the aspect of giving, like let's say Poland gave the U.S. Those Su-24s or something like that. If they were to give us those planes, like why not give it to Ukraine? There are some people that were kind of uh, wishy-washy about that, and that's what I was addressing with that comment. But as for the no-fly zone, I think somebody asked that, like, why couldn't we do that, like to part of Ukraine that Ukraine holds already, like the western side, and to that point, I did say, well, if we came invited, we wouldn't be directly clashing with Putin, but we would be standing our ground on part of the soil we were invited on, because I mean, Putin's already coming into Ukraine uninvited anyway. So those are two separate issues, but I think you might have gotten those conflated.
Oh no, that's actually completely understandable, and I appreciate the clarification there. Briefly on sort of the proposed or allegedly discussed Western Ukraine no-fly zone, I think that initiative in general carries the same risks of a general no-fly zone, but I think it tackles less of the problem. When we're looking at civilian casualties as a result of Russian aerial bombardment, we're seeing that in eastern Ukraine. We're not seeing massed airstrikes currently going on in Lviv or in Odessa. We're seeing sort of guided missiles and, again, indirect fire capabilities there. So I think a Western, sort of humanitarian corridor, no-fly zone in Ukraine still carries the risk of there being air combat between Western aircraft and Russian aircraft, but without protecting, the civilian populations that a general no-fly zone would. So it seems, to me at least, it seems like it's carrying all of the risk with none of the mitigated benefits that a general no-fly zone would. So I think it's, I think it's an even worse proposal.
Yeah, just for a majority, as they started to hear about this idea, it sounded like a panacea, but it's actually more like a placebo at this time. John, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention also the morale aspect of, the Russians and the Russian people. If they're naturally predisposed to, not want to fight Ukraine, if the saber rattling and inability for Russian and U.S. troops to play nice in Syria and elsewhere is any indication, that could quickly change and be a rallying cry if we start getting into direct engagement with them. The question I had as it pertained to the counter battery, do we have a sense for what the breakdown is in terms of the damage being done right now? A lot of early damage from MLRS and various indirect fire. Have they pretty much exhausted those munitions and are more reliant on more conventional artillery? And is there a difference in terms of how the counter battery would be effective against those different types? Thanks.
Wolverine, would you like to answer this question?
Yes. So counter battery works against any type of weapon systems, whether it be MLRS, tube artillery, and even mortars. So it will work against any of those systems. I'd have to check to see what the ranges are because some have a little bit better range than others, but they do have a significant range. Counter battery radars are generally not always co-located with the firing units because of the way they operate. So what can happen is you can actually have a firing battery set up at one location. You can have your counter battery radar set up in another location. And if the artillery battery gets hit, because obviously if a Ukrainian battery fires, a Russian battery return fire, the battery is going to likely more get hit. So you can actually set your counter battery off to a different location, and that would actually preserve it. And if the battery gets hit, it just moves away, goes to another spot, links up with another artillery or another firing battery, and continues on with the mission. So I've seen a lot of counter battery fire use when I was in Fallujah. It was effective. They knew where the rounds were coming from. The only issue that we had was, and it was more because of the type of warfare that we were fighting, and that the insurgents were setting up the rocket launchers in a way that when we fired our counter battery, we'd hit the spot where the rockets were at, but the crews were already gone because they do use like different types of homemade delay fuses and stuff like that. But yeah, counter battery is awesome. It works really good, and if you get it synced in with your batteries and they can get good data back and forth, then your batteries are golden. And one thing that the Ukrainians do have is they do have two S7 pions that they can use. They have the BM30 Smirches that they can use for counter battery, and the BM27 Uragons you can also use for counter battery and stuff like that. So, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
I see that we have Nicole and then Andrew. So let's start with Nicole, and then Andrew, you can proceed.
Thank you. This is Nicole. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thank you. Loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. So, gosh, I've been on here since Walter kind of started this thing and took off. And so the first thing I always say is I'm from Dallas, Texas, and everybody keeps comparing Texas to Ukraine. And I say, hell yes, because we fight just like you guys do. And we are very united with you guys. And Texas has a very independent spirit and a fighting spirit. And that's kind of how I like to introduce myself, is to say that Texas is absolutely very much like Ukraine. And I'm going to kind of take this in a little different direction for a second, because I've been working really hard with a lot of people here in Texas about kind of a gap that I think is getting ready to happen with the refugees. So when I first kind of jumped on here and was helping people, we were trying to get people out immediately and get them from, where they were, from kind of point A to point B. And a lot of Texans jumped in. Actually, Houston was the first place that started this Airbnb. I don't know how many of you people are familiar with kind of what's going on and what we've kind of done here in the States with this.
Oh yeah, we are. Trust me, we are aware.
Okay, so that started here in Texas. Okay, and a friend of mine. So anyway, we've gotten to the top of Airbnb. So here's what we want to do, and I don't want to belabor this point, but so what we're going to do is we're going to bridge this gap, because I think what's going to happen is what we've done. And so I've been in contact with, there was a few people that we were trying to get out really immediately, and I've got contacts in the government and things like that, and it wasn't working. Okay, so we were like, okay, we can't get these people immediately, because we were opening our homes. We're Texans. We're like, come on. We've got bedrooms, we've got big houses here in Texas, everything's bigger in Texas. So we were like, come on, y'all just come, we'll take care of you, we'll figure this out. And we were trying to coordinate to get people here, but we couldn't get people out. So the next thing we know, everybody started this Airbnb thing. Well, lo and behold, the executives, all that, everything's in Texas. So long story short, what we're going to try and do is we're going to bridge the gap, and we're going to get the people, once everybody's gotten out of Ukraine, we're going to bridge the people to get wherever they need to go to their next point. And so what we're working on, a collective measure, is what's the next plan? Because while everybody's focused, as they should be, where everybody is right now, what's happening today, what's going to happen in 3 weeks, in 4 weeks, in 6 weeks, in 2 months, right? Where's everybody going to be? That's where we want to be. Where are we going to get everybody to be, even if it's just temporary? And of course, everybody can come back to Ukraine, because Ukraine's going to win, right? Ukraine is going to keep Ukraine. But right now, to keep people safe and get the women and children out, we've got to get the women and children out. And I don't know if people know who Bethany Frankel is, but she is a powerhouse out of New York. And she's got an organization, and she's formed, it's called Be Strong. And she has formed a pipeline of people and things coming in there that is amazing. So you guys should look up her as well. And we're looking to partner with her and what she's formed. She's raised $35 million. And so basically what I'm trying to tell you guys is what I'm looking to do here in Texas is anybody on this call that's here that wants to partner with us. We've also got so many Ukrainians here in Texas and in Dallas, where I'm based, that are doing so much to help the refugees and the humanitarian effort. And then, of course, everything will also backfill anything that we need to do. And I work that through Walter, and we'll send that in private messages to him. So we stand strong with you guys. Texas, I swear, Ukrainians and Texas are one and the same. I don't know if y'all know much about United States politics and Texas and everything, but we are so similar to you guys.